Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. The return of the Indian pilot Abhinand in the joint session of the Parliament, Abhinandan, a very short while ago, Pakistan has shown India it has made an unparalleled gesture for peace in the region. Will it be reciprocated? Will we see a response from India befitting such a grand gesture that Pakistan has made? We'll be talking about that. We'll also be talking about the war hysteria, the role of the Indian media, the reaction that we have seen after the statement by the Prime Minister was made saying that Abhinandan would be returned to India as a gesture of goodwill by Pakistan, as a gesture of peace by Pakistan. Will we see any kind of reciprocity? We'll be talking about all of that. I have with me Zameer Akram Saab, who's a former ambassador. Thank you for joining us today. Saeed Fakhr Imam Saab, who's an MNA with PTI. Thank you for joining us today. And Barrister Muhammad Ali Saif, Senator with MQM. Thank you for being with us today. Ji, Zameer Saab, like I said, we've seen this gesture is clearly unparalleled. We haven't seen this kind of a gesture come out. The cries for Nobel Prize really, are stemming from the way that this gesture was made, what it shows to India, what it shows to the world as far as Pakistan is concerned, what we mean to the world, and the fact that we mean what we say when we say that we want peace in the region. Do you think that we will see a kind of reciprocity from across the border, considering our history, considering the war hysteria that the Indian media has been perpetuating as this war started, fueling their people, fueling their media, fueling their armed forces? What do you think?
Well, unfortunately, we will not see any positive response from the Indian side for this gesture, for all the reasons that you have mentioned. We have to understand the kind of false narrative that the Indian government and its pliable media has been projecting, and that kind of positive gesture does not gel with the kind of propaganda and hysteria that they have pushed. So unfortunately not. I think we need to be looking at Indian actions for de-escalation on hard issues.
Right.
And I think the most important issue here, or the most important question here, was the fact that Pakistan demonstrated its willingness and its ability to react militarily to an incursion by the Indian side.
Right.
And then we also made it clear that if the Indians were to repeat such an action or do something else against Pakistan, we would respond as well. I think that is really the point that is sent the right message across the border. Plus, the international community has weighed in. I think a number of countries are concerned about this kind of developments taking place between two nuclear weapon states. And in this, so far, fortunately, deterrence has prevailed, but the possibility of accidental, unintentional use or escalation cannot be ruled out. So the real objective is to de-escalate now.
Right. Moving on, Fakhr Imam Saab, do you think that in your experience, as a very old, experienced parliamentarian, in your experience, do you think that we will get the kind of reaction we want from India, considering the statement that the Prime Minister made after he said that we will release Abhinandan? It was followed by the same sort of remarks from across the border. Do you think it's part of their false bravado, after seeing that, like, Ambassador Saab is saying that we can react militarily, but we choose not to? It's part of that? Or do you think there's more to it?
Well, I think the generosity of spirit shown by Prime Minister Imran Khan has gone well with possibly all those people who do not agree with Modi across the border. And there's a large number, 21 political parties have ganged up against him and said that he's dragging India into a situation and primarily using the Indian forces for his own political objective. So unlike Pakistan, where all the political parties on the political spectrum have come together and unified, India is showing a division right in the middle, with very large number of parties now disassociating from India on their narrative, and at the same time the international community, what at Hanoi yesterday, President Trump had said
Right.
that he's getting some gestures from both sides. On the first day, the White House spokesman, the Pentagon, went all along with India. This is the 14th of February. Now, in the last 24 hours, there's a change of heart, because I think they have realized two things. Number one, that Modi's reaction was totally knee-jerk, without any substantial evidence, because Mr. Imran Khan twice has said, give us the evidence,
Right.
and we'll probe. But obviously they didn't have it. And then the narrative of hitting people at X hundred number of people having died on our side, again not proved by either satellite or any other evidence. But at the same time, I think what is really of real importance is that Pakistan, which in the past our narrative did not sell well, and India, despite the fact that in Kashmir, despite the total atrocities they've done and gone to the extent of having people go blind with pellets,
Right.
you know, and still the world was not going along. But recently, three institutions have, global institutions have written on human rights violation in Kashmir: the United Nations, the EU, and the UK Parliament. So
you think- what
these
about-
are the kind of things now we need to rev those up.
Right.
And
we need to not lose.
but now with India, Modi, I think, is a loose cannon. Anything can be expected of him. No kind of gesture from our side is going to change his mindset, because he has gone along on this jingoistic, chauvinistic, ultra-nationalistic for too long, far too long, and has gotten away with it. And so far, ultimately the Indian people who will have to vote him out, but
Right.
we should be
Prepared for anything.
totally all prepared, readiness on our toes.
Right.
We should not expect anything from Modi as far as I can see.
What about this dossier that was handed over to us very late? I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, actually, I don't know what the dossier has. I'm sure they've tried now
Right.
to cover up of the evidence that the government of Pakistan has been asking for the last several days.
Right.
Maybe this is one way that, if at all they have softened on their stance, which so far they have not shown any, there could be a possible exit route for them to show to their own people that, that's one point of view, but I'm not sure
Right.
what exactly the dossier contains.
Right. Senator Saab, as far as damaging their narrative permanently is concerned, as far, to the world, because India has been, like Fakhr Imam Saab is saying, it's been playing up their card of being secular. They've been saying that, they are friendly, they are open to all and every, religion, the way that they've been portraying their image to the world. Do you think this will dent it permanently?
Well, I believe that the narrative based on secularism and
Right.
liberalism and democratic principles, that is the narrative probably of the Indian nation as a whole, but not extremists like Modi. I think Modi is an ultra-Hindu, nationalist, extremist, fundamentalist. And I believe that his ideas and his actions in the past, they are completely contrary to the secular philosophy. What he did in the context of Babri Masjid and all that, and the
Right.
anti-Muslim rights. So I believe that he's a declared criminal anyways. I mean, and there shouldn't be any doubt in anybody's mind about
But
his
we have
intention.
to acknowledge that he had granted, he had been granted a sort of acceptance, as
Yeah.
in the international community. Do you think that it will dent that?
In fact, the international community looks at the de facto situation, since he was
Right.
elected as the Prime Minister of India, and
Right.
India is a quite a large, big country. Therefore, international community had to interact with his government. So I don't call that as kind
As
of
an acceptance, you're
yeah,
saying. It's
yeah,
not that.
legitimization of his
Right.
conduct, but a de facto situation with which the international community had to deal with. So number one. Number two, insofar as the prospects of future threats are concerned, I believe still he's there. I think we shouldn't rule that out, and we shouldn't be relaxed and satisfied that
Right.
the threat is over just by handing over Abhinandan to them, or by just showing our peace, or extending the arm or hand of peace towards India. I don't
Right.
think that is going to have any effect, because in my understanding, escalating this kind of this tensions between India and Pakistan, and militarization of Indian mindset, that is at the moment in Modi's interest.
Right.
For winning the election, he needs to galvanize and muster the support of all those people who believe in violence in the name of Hindu nationalism. And I think he's playing to the gallery, the media that is towing his line.
But this debacle, I'm sure it has cost him a lot of, a lot on the election front also, considering that, the way that even Fakhr Imam Sahib is saying, and generally speaking, we've seen the way that India has been divided and they're not united like we are.
Yeah.
There is a clear difference of opinion there, and people will not, I mean, accept. Do you think they will accept this kind of an irresponsible handling of affairs of their country in the future?
Well, that we have to wait and see.
Right.
We have to wait for the election results, but I think BJP is already claiming that their election margin has increased by 22 seats, minimum
Right.
22 seats. They'll win more than what their existing number is. So I think that they are looking at it from a totally different angle. Let's see how it goes. I'm sure there are sensible people in India. I'm sure they are in majority, but then they have to be brought together and transform their strength into votes, and winning the number of seats that they win in the and the majority that they
And to be
acquire in
honest,
the
it's
parliament.
not, I mean, we have to also consider the fact that that narrative, that extremist narrative, that irresponsible narrative, that hostile narrative was also carried forth by the Indian media, wasn't it, Ambassador Sahib?
Absolutely. They are part and parcel of this campaign that Mr. Modi has been waging, and especially after he came into power,
Right.
this kind of narrative has gained ground, and the media outlets, particularly television and other sources, have picked this up. And today, no, we may not like to accept it, but the fact is that hatred towards Pakistan is a popular sentiment.
Right.
Which
Which is what he's trying to cash in
which is
anyway
exactly
for the
and
election.
then of course he's built it up by cashing in on this anti-Muslim sentiment as well, and projecting Kashmir, the problem in Kashmir, as simply a result of Pakistan's interference,
Right.
whereas it's actually something much more serious, and that is a reaction to Indian repression. So I think that, and the senator is absolutely right. I was also looking at some of these reports,
Right.
that Modi's people claim that their numbers have improved
Right.
as a result of what's been happening, and it's the false narrative that they are feeding to their own people, and that is it's sinking in, at least to some of them, and right-minded people such as those from some of the opposition parties, the Congress and others, are pointing out to the dangers of this kind of brinkmanship that
Right.
Mr. Modi is engaging in, but he is calculating that
This will
promoting
right,
hatred
right.
towards Pakistan will sell, and that will help him. So
Right.
he's banking on that.
As far as Fakhr Imam Sahib, as far as the international community is concerned, as far as their reaction is concerned, we've been talking about that. What about the OIC? We've declined now, considering that the invitation was given to India also. Do you think that kind of reaction, perhaps the kind of reaction we were expecting from the world, it hasn't come out that way?
Well, I think it's very, very unfortunate that the OIC invited the Indian Foreign Minister,
Right.
Sushma Swaraj, the way they did, as the chief guest in the inaugural ceremony,
Right.
although they are neither a member nor an observer of this particular, and we are a founder member of OIC. But anyway, they've done it, and our government in its own wisdom has decided not to be part of this particular opening ceremony. But relations in the world diplomatically are those where there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies, but permanent interests.
Right.
And this is a reflection of that, because business, commercial, and other interests sometimes have a very long-term effect. And India is a growing economy. They've grown, unfortunately, faster than we have in the last 27 years. And this is a sort of and there's also probably large community of Indian workers in some of these countries. So in that sense, but anyway, I think in the long term, Erdogan, president, has gone along with our narrative. And
We've seen a reaction, you know, a support from the Saudis also. We've seen the Turkish support. We've seen, you know, Russia wanting to mediate at the time.
Putin has asked
Right.
the Indians that he'd like to, mediate if
Right,
possible. Even the king of Jordan
Right.
lately has been in touch with our prime minister. So on the international front is very much there. But I'd like to say internally, you see, ultimately Modi's own requirement as a politician is the vote. He's lost 5 state elections, and I think this is a direct reaction to that. He probably has not been able to govern and administer India like he did the state of Gujarat, where 11% was the growth rate. Now, India, he cannot in 29 states probably emulate that or replicate that in the same way. And having had major setbacks in his own economic growth rates that he thought he could do, which
Right.
is very difficult in a country like India. So I think he's gone back to his sort of the ultra-nationalistic, jingoistic way of Hindutva and this psyche. But I think it can also rebound. After all, it's 82% are Hindus according to their census.
Right.
12% are Muslim, 6% are other minorities. And his way of doing this, and then these human rights reports ultimately coming out from these powerful Western institutions, one can set them aside as far as India's own internal politics is concerned. And the ham-handed manner that he's really got, hammer and tongs at the Indians, the Kashmiri citizenry, I think ultimately there will have to be a price somewhere along the line. And my own assessment is election is not going to be that easy at all.
Right. If this actually leads to, and we certainly hope so, it leads to de-escalation and we see, sanity prevail, which we hope for. How do we carry forward this complete insane, this is insanity, perpetuated by India, which has led to this situation where we are today, to benefit us as far as Kashmir is concerned, to take our stance further? How do we do that? Because that is very important to us. That is, of course, the core issue between the two countries. The world knows that. And this should, dent the narrative which India has been telling the world that, we are actually the ones not willing to come to the table. We are the ones actually giving, although, we've been saying, let's have a dialogue. Dialogue is the only way, which is what the Prime Minister has been saying for the last couple of days also. But how do we do that?
Well, you see, first of all, my take on your statement is that, first of all, there's no doubt in anybody's mind that Kashmir is the core issue, and that is what is causing all these tensions between India and Pakistan. But I don't think that it is the only issue. Supposing, just for the sake of an argument, if we settle the Kashmir issues in accordance with either through bilateral negotiations or through the UN or international mediation, what if they create or kind of go for this water crisis and create problems for Pakistan, rivers flowing through from India to Pakistan? That would be another cause. There could be any other issue raised or exploited by the Indian government if they want to. But that would depend on their mindset and their worldview. I think at the moment there's no doubt that Kashmir is a problem, and they have used the situation in Kashmir as an excuse for attacking Pakistan.
Right.
Kashmir is a disputed territory, and insofar as international legal paradigm is concerned, if Indian forces, till the time the Indian forces are there in Kashmir, they are in a way an occupying force, according to the definition of occupying force, because this is a disputed territory in accordance with the UN resolutions. And there are a number of UN resolutions which have not just condemned what is happening there, but have also suggested ways and means to resolve this dispute. But India so far has been successful, in my opinion, in their claim that this is a bilateral issue between Pakistan and India, and no third power has, must poke their noses in this matter.
Right.
I think on the diplomatic front, we have so far, in my opinion, let me use this strong word, failed to convince the international community that Kashmir is not just a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan, and it's not just a simple issue of a dispute over a territory. It is an issue that has the potential of becoming a threat to international peace and security, according to the UN Charter, which is one of the preconditions.
Doesn't this recent episode prove that now?
It would again depend, in my opinion, I think that Pakistan's foreign ministry has to play its cards properly. I don't think that, not going and not deciding not to attend the OIC, okay, not the foreign minister, but at some level there must have been, there
Some
should have been
Pakistani
some kind of
presence, you say.
representation there in order to counter that woman who has been invited there. She will be there, the floor will be hers, and there will be no objection from our side. Insofar as the other countries are concerned, like UAE and Saudi Arabia, I don't think that we should be foolish enough to depend or to be happy that, okay, they have, since they have
will put
issued a
out-
statement,
right.
so they are on our side. They are not on our side. They are on their own sides, because they
Right.
want to lure India and to exploit its economic potential there.
Right.
So I mean, let's be frank. In international affairs, there is no permanent friend, neither a permanent enemy. I think Pakistan must play its cards properly, and this is what I said yesterday in my speech, at least, when Shah Mahmood Qureshi Sahab was there in the parliament, and I said to him, I addressed him, I said, don't expect the Pakistan army to do this fight for you. It is your war. You have to lead this war, because you have to convince the world community that India is the aggressor, and you are being kind of victimized by this Indian aggression. And what we are debating here is basically the result of that. So I think we need to put a lot of weight and exert pressure on international powers.
And perhaps this is the right
realize.
time now that
This
we've
is-
made this gesture. We've told the world that we want to have a dialogue. We've
Indeed.
told the world again and again. And there are all these people, all these nations who are even willing to help us, perhaps intervene.
Yeah.
Isn't this
But
the right
in my
time?
personal opinion, the very fact that we refused to go and we decided not to attend the OIC this conference
Right.
Was not playing our cards well.
Let me ask Fakhr Imam Sahab this question before I go to Ambassador Sabji. Fakhr Imam Sahab, why do you think that it was the right decision to quit the OIC completely, considering, like Senator Saab is saying, perhaps we should have had some presence, we should have, been able to put forward our own stance and not leave it to any other country, like Senator Saab is saying.
Well, my own assessment is that we had to make some kind of a gesture or a,
Protest.
yes, in the sense that we did not, with the kind of situation, I mean, it's for the whole world to see what the Indians have done,
Right.
the kind of rogue type of decisions that they have made. I go along with not attending. But at the same time, I feel the powers that can influence India
Right.
are not sitting in the OIC. The powers that will influence India would be the United States of America, would be the European Union, would be Berlin, part of the Union, Britain, France, possibly Japan, because Japan is an economic power, if not a military power, China, Russia. And if required, high-powered, only one or two individuals possibly could go to these capitals right now
Right.
to put our affairs, because it's now reaching a stage,
Right.
if India does not de-escalate, that we do some kind of a very active diplomacy at the highest level at the capitals which matter to India most of all. And at least our part, we would have put down that kind of, through these diplomatic high-powered visits. And these people should be very selected in a very, in a manner where they can, they have the
They can actually put
ability to
forward
persuade.
Right.
So that the people who are actually, we are trying to persuade would be, but each country carries its own weight. And but one thing we have shown resolve, we have shown will, political will, and we have shown the capacity that in a conventional war, we can match the Indians.
Right. And we've shown political unity also
yes,
at this
total
time.
unity for this, and in that sense, so and if required, we could even take some of our top opposition people with us.
Right.
No harm, because in that way we would show that kind of unity, where we feel and this man is, as I said, a person you can't rely on at all, Mr. Modi. So Pakistan has to take up all elements for we are fighting a defensive war.
Right.
They are the ones first time who crossed our borders after 71.
Right.
So the aggressor under the UN Charter or any other international law, they would be declared to be the aggressor. We have played a defensive role and done it so well that it's left India with a great deal of embarrassment.
Right. Let me go on to Ambassador Saab. Ambassador Saab, as far as a bilateral issue is concerned, certainly India wants the world to look at Kashmir as a bilateral issue. But this very war between us, this very escalation from the Indian borders, this recent debacle, hasn't it shown to the world that any issue between nuclear states like Pakistan and India is in fact not a bilateral issue, because it will have an impact, it will have consequences for the entire world. In that situation right now, isn't, like Fakhr Imam Sahib is saying, isn't this the right time to cash in on that sentiment?
Absolutely. I think that despite the challenges, there are also opportunities, and we should use these opportunities to project our point of view, especially on the Kashmir issue, and
Right.
underline the fact that these kind of tensions between India and Pakistan will continue to take place
Right.
as long as the Kashmir issue remains unresolved. So one of the reasons why it is an international issue is, as you mentioned, that if, God forbid, it leads to an exchange or a nuclear exchange, it will have repercussions across the globe.
Right.
But the other reason is that even in the Simla agreement, which says that that the two sides will find a solution through that, but it also goes on to say, or through any other means mutually agreed upon.
Right.
Okay, that number one. Number two, international law, no bilateral agreement or multilateral agreement supersedes the United Nations and its decisions.
Right.
So the UN resolutions remain valid even today. We have, unfortunately, I should say, for the last 20 years or so, backpedaled on the Kashmir issue. We have soft pedaled on the Kashmir issue. We have
Right.
not given it the kind of priority we should have given it. We need to up our game on this issue, and we need to go to the capitals, as Fakhr Imam says, to the major capitals of the world. We need to go to the United Nations. I mean, I was surprised that when the Security Council took adopted this statement on the situation in this region, there was no mention really of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute,
Right.
which we should have insisted on. And but I don't understand why we didn't do it. But I think there is still opportunity because of the tensions. We should use these tensions to underline that Kashmir is an issue that needs to be resolved. On the OIC bit, I'd like to clarify.
Right.
First of all, Pakistan has not exited from the OIC as an organization. We have decided that the foreign minister will not participate in this inaugural session in which the Indian foreign minister will be speaking. But that does not mean that the Pakistani delegation will not be represented. So I think that this is a wrong presumption. It's that the foreign minister will not be there. Now, this also has a background on which I think I should say we have not been up to speed. We should have known what was happening. And okay, I am willing to admit that the UAE government acted surreptitiously, did not inform us, and brought about this situation that we are confronted with today.
Right.
But we should have known, and we should have acted much before this kind of a situation came up and has confronted us today.
You're saying that we should have conveyed that perhaps we will not.
Well, first of all, our people on the ground
Right.
should have known what is happening.
We should have
We
anticipated.
should have. I mean,
Right.
this is not the first time. Let's be very frank. This is not the first time, because India has consistently tried to gate crash into this organization.
Right.
We are a founder member. Even the day it was founded, there were people who were saying that India should also become a member. And I remember this was the time when Al-Aqsa attack took place. At that time, General Yahya was the president. And he had told the Saudis and the others very bluntly that if you're going to bring in India, Pakistan is going to walk out of this.
I will not go.
So this is the kind of thing we need to be telling them. And I know also, while I was in service, there were instances when some people tried to bring the Indians, and we had told them very bluntly that if you want to bring Indians in, then you have to forget Pakistan being a member of the OIC. And without Pakistan, the OIC as an organization is meaningless.
Yet they've chosen to invite, knowing that this
That
will
is
be
because the UAE, and in particular let me put it to you
Right.
bluntly.
Please do so.
It's the foreign minister of the UAE who has a chip on his shoulder about Pakistan. That's for the reason, I know what the reason is, but let's not go into that. But the
Right.
fact is that he has deliberately done this. And we must make it very clear to the UAE government. Oh, fine that the UAE, thousands of our people work there, and the UAE is helping us economically, investing in Pakistan, but we are also doing a lot of things. We have done a lot for the UAE, and they also depend on us for a lot of things. So it's a two-way
It's a
street.
mutual relationship,
It's
yes.
a two-way street.
Right.
But unfortunately, we have not used our leverage to its exact potential.
Right. Fakhar Imamzad, as far as Kashmir is concerned, we perhaps have not been as consistent in our efforts as we should have been. Do you think that's true?
Well, as Zamir Akram Saab has said, that post, I think, 2001 to 2005, we almost put the whole of the UN resolutions, if my memory is correct, on the back burner.
Right.
And we almost wanted to negotiate, where the Indians were also at the time willing to negotiate. But in the end, it came to naught, and we went through those provisions of 4 points here and there. But ultimately, the Indians backed out. So now that whatever the situation has been in the past, that's history. I feel today is the right time. Maybe it is to our advantage today,
Right.
in the way that Modi has acted so arbitrarily, non-rationally, illogically, that now is the time, I think, for active diplomacy for Pakistan to put a case in front of the international community. And this, I wasn't aware of this, the Jammu and Kashmir thing not being mentioned in this UN statement that Zamir Saab has just mentioned. We need to reiterate that. We need to reiterate that in all our official démarches on
Other
this
than
area.
sending top-level delegations, which you've mentioned, what other step can we take to mobilize the world, do you think?
Well, I think the media, think tanks, are extremely important.
Civil society.
Right.
is very
Well,
important.
yeah, but where it gets crystallized is in the media, and where people read about it, and the think tanks, because they zero in on all these areas where which are the hotspots of the world. And Kashmir has been taking more of a backseat. Now is the time where scholars, intellectuals, the intelligentsia, and those who are concerned about this region, and the region has two nuclearized powers,
Right.
in this kind of a very insecure situation, it'll impact the whole globe. So I think if it is put to them, and there should be, I think initially the international media was not, but I was seeing on the BBC this evening, they were covering it virtually
Right,
every minute
right.
for the last, with the handing over of that one officer,
Yes. yes,
was being
that's right.
monitored for about 4 to 5 hours continuously. This was not the case a few weeks back or few years back. They had forgotten Kashmir. Now Kashmir has come into the center stage. Let's make full use of it and zero in on it. And I think this is the moment and the time where we can raise the whole thing, and then use whatever leverages have in whichever country and go forward.
Like Senator Saab was saying, certainly water is an issue. We have a host of other
Very,
issues.
very, very major.
Right. What about issues like that? I mean, we have to come to an agreement to coexist peacefully. Where neighbors, one can choose one's friends but not one's neighbors. As far as India is concerned, overall, the sentiment that is there, certainly, we hope that there will be a more responsible government next that does not exhort people towards this kind of violence, this kind of irrationality. But what other alternative do we have to get India to realize that with a neighbor that is a nuclear power, even with the Kashmir issue, we hope resolved, which is a huge issue. There are other issues which Senator Saab brought up.
No, I think he has rightly pointed out.
Right.
If you go back, it goes back to the Indus Water Treaty, or maybe 1947.
Right.
When immediately after partition, the Indians did two things. They did not give us our assets, and they immediately blocked, because of the, in my opinion, very unfair partition plan of Sir Cyril Ratcliffe. We lost the headworks of our major canals. And immediately they blocked our waters. And our irrigation minister, Sardar Shaukat Hayat, had to go to Delhi and then sign a few temporary kind of arrangements. And these temporary arrangements then ultimately got fulfilled in the Indus Water Treaty of 1960, where 3 of our rivers were virtually written off, 37 million acre feet of water, and the rest of 104 million acre feet of water. But then what has India done? It has built several dams upstream.
Right.
And most of the time our commissioners, with respect of our Indus Water Commission, were either silent or were, invoking the laws much after the event that they should have. And
Right.
a couple of times even we've lost, unfortunately, in the international courts of justice. We need to bring these things into focus, and be aware of the fact where we have gone wrong and where the shortcomings are. We should fulfill them with competent people, with people with a certain commitment, devotion, dedication, and loyalty. In my opinion, a lot of the time we've had people at the top who have been pushing their own careers, and not for the state and the people of Pakistan.
Right. But Sahab, as far as the Indus Water Treaty is concerned, as far as our water, isn't it true that as far as India is concerned, we're getting the water that we are getting is the surplus water anyways, because a while back we got threats from India again about them, blocking our waters. How much can they really do as far as our water is concerned?
Well, not much, but still, I mean, technically speaking, I don't think that India has the potential to completely stop our water
Right.
flowing towards our side. However, they have been building dams, and
Right.
those actions of India has a certain threat potential contained in them. Number one. Number two is that we already have litigated or argued this particular matter before international fora as well, and we frankly haven't been able to
put our case
across our
across, yes.
properly. So this is a dispute that has a potential in future to create problems. But coming to the point that you made earlier and asked Mr. Fakhar
Right.
Imam, I think that one of the steps that we must do, and which we have not been able to do, is to realize that in international relations and in international law, state is actually a representative, a government is a representative of the executive organ of the state.
Right.
But people-to-people interaction is more important. And how do you do that? Through civil society organizations, okay. But there is a more potent forum that we have, which we have not been able to even identify, let alone use or exploit, and that is our parliament. In Europe, most of their serious disputes over which they had fought 2 big world wars, they were resolved through interaction between parliamentarians, like the Council of Europe. They ended up creating a parliament based on European representatives. Then the EU itself has its own parliament, and there are elections taking place to it to elect members for the election European Parliament from all over the territory. I personally think, and I have experience of working in IPU as well as we have another parliamentary association called the Asian Parliamentary Association, which is we meet every 3 to 4 months, and in different capitals of Asia. Representatives of parliament are present there, and we have a direct interaction with the representatives of people of those countries.
Right.
Afghanistan is an issue. I have met several Afghan parliamentarians, and I don't think that they have that kind of animosity or hatred against Pakistan as we see or as we hear on media. Similarly, on the Indian side, we have people in India who probably are more friendlier towards Pakistan than we think they are. So I think these are some of the venues that we have not been able to exploit properly, or even identify that they have the potential to resolve these disputes. So I personally think a lot can be done, but you have to take this initiative. Don't let the Indians have this initiative, because if you allow the Indian state to take its own steps and then you simply have to react, like in the present case,
Right.
what we are doing is actually reacting to what they are
We
doing.
have, but so you agree that we
have
have
lost-
been more reactive rather than,
Yes.
you know, actually
Yeah.
proactive. We haven't actually,
yes.
you know, we haven't taken the measures
And that
like
is
you're
because
saying.
of our inability to assess the situation. We go for political gains rather than material gains. Political gains, like Modi tried to take political advantage of from this situation for just winning the election. That's it, and it's a very short-term plan.
Right.
So I believe we should have a longer-term objective and strategy, and probably that will yield positive results.
Right. Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for joining us. Zamir Akram Saab, thank you for being with us. Saeed Fakhr Imam, thank you for joining us today. Barrister Muhammad Ali Saif, thank you for joining us today. As far as our gesture of peace is concerned, as far as our unequivocal, unparalleled gesture to the world and to India that we want dialogue over Kashmir, we want peace in the region is concerned, we certainly hope that it will lead to de-escalation. We hope that it will lead to the same kind, if not the same kind, at least the same, you know, the same, perhaps, you know, a little more than, a little more acceptance from India, a little more graciousness from India, but we certainly have no reason to expect that will happen. We're of course ready to redress any kind of action that comes from India. We are fully capable of doing that. The Prime Minister has said so, the armed forces have said so, and we all stand united on that front. But in the meantime, we all need to consider what our long-term goals should be, what our long-term plans should be to combat this kind of irresponsible action coming from across the border. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.